What's that, Starfleet Academy? You want to unpick the ending of Deep Space Nine? One of the most problematic endings of any Star Trek series. You're going to do that, are you? Alright, fine. You want to get into it? Let's get into it. Space. A continuous extension interval between planets, stars and other objects. These are the critiques of the critic McElvoy. His continuing mission to review strange new shows, to seek out new work and new bastardizations, to boldly note what no critic has noted before. Critics loggers, do you agree with me that there are some things in life which are just better left alone? You know the sort of thing I mean, don't you? Your mother disappeared when you were very, very young, and Dad's never talked about it very much. The police interviewed him at the time, and they made a few inquiries with your friends and your relatives, but they generally concluded there was nothing to see here. Your mother was never found, and Dad's never mentioned her, and there are no pictures of her in the house. But you're curious, but you think, no, maybe it's just better if I don't rake it up. Maybe it's just better if I don't ask him. The answers might hurt you. And there are many things in life like that, aren't there? There are many things that niggle at us and claw at us that we perhaps think, on balance, we better leave in the past where they belong. One of those things, I suggest, is the ending of Deep Space Nine, What You Leave Behind, the series finale that was transmitted back in 1999. What a different time that was. What an optimistic age that was. And it was problematic, wasn't it? For many, many reasons. But the thing that stuck out, that left the bitter taste in the mouth for Trekkies, was Benjamin Sisko, the captain of Deep Space Nine, devoted father and conscious subversion of a racial stereotype, the absentee black dad, ended the show in a monumental misstep, one might say, by abandoning his pregnant wife and child to go and live with a group of aliens who, you'll recall, have complete control over time and space.
It's difficult to explain. It's not linear.
What is it?
My love. My destiny. The prophets saved Newcastle. I'm their emissary. And they still have a great deal for me to do. But first, there is much to learn. Things only the prophets can teach me.
When will you be back?
It's hard to say. Maybe a year. Maybe yesterday. But I will be back.
Sisko said to Cassidy, "Don't worry, I'll be back sometime." A line that Avery Brooks insisted was inserted because Ira Steven Behr, in a moment of madness, a blind spot if you will, was ready to have him disappear for all time. Despite the prophets being a species that can pick somebody up and drop them back whenever they like. Sisko could have joined the Prophets for thousands of years, learned all he could possibly learn, and be dropped right back where he was picked up from. No problem. But Dad, I thought you were off to explore a life with a prophet. I've done it, son. I'm back. 1,000 years older, but much wiser. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, we were going to enjoy our house on Bajor, weren't we? I've bought all of that land, and we were going to settle there and live the rest of our lives in peace on Bajor. And I'm so delighted to be back, because now I can be there for the birth of my new child, and spend my life with Cassidy as I intended, and that'll be wonderful. Indeed, in one of the non-canonical Deep Space Nine novels, Unity, I believe, he does exactly that. He comes back on the day of the child's birth and has a baby daughter, and they go and live on Bajor. What a lovely, clean, nice ending that would have been to Deep Space Nine. Wouldn't that have been reassuring for us all if we'd learned that that's what had happened to Sisko? But it's not what happened, is it? Not now. Not now we've seen Starfleet Academy Episode 5, Series Acclamation Mill, written by the imbecilic pairing of Kirsten Beyer and Tawny Nuisance, Mariner from Lower Decks, who has the fucking audacity, to appear in this episode as, spoiler, the present day incarnation of Dax. That's really squatting on Deep Space Nine, isn't it, and taking a slash. But that's not the episode's biggest. If only Tawny Nuisance as Dax was the kick in the genitals that we received, we could recover from that. We'd be on the ground for a little while, rolling from side to side in agonising pain, but we'd get over it, wouldn't we? But really, the revelation in this episode, which Sam, the photonic retarded teenager, an emissary to her people of photonics, decides that in order to understand her role as an emissary, she must research what happened to Sisko, emissary to emissary, by way of learning more about herself through his story, though no new information really is garnered, but we'll come back to that. The worst part of it is the immediate revelation that Sisko never returned to his family after he left them at the end of Deep Space Nine. 800 years on, his fate is still unknown. Nobody knows if he's dead or alive, whether he, And these terms don't really apply, by the way, because if he's with the Prophets, he could be both dead and alive. He exists in a sort of non-linear space, doesn't he? So these things don't really apply, these ideas. But for me, that is a confirmation, if you like, of the DS9 finale's worst misstep. It locks it in. Whereas this was an opportunity to perhaps to rehabilitate Sisko's character, to undo this mistake. But they couldn't take it. Why couldn't they take it? Because the series is set in the 32nd century. And if you're going to investigate Benjamin Sisko's mystery, there still has to be a mystery to solve. Therefore, if you go down that cul-de-sac, he can't have come back, can he? What a shame that this couldn't have been a proper attempt, as I think it was intended to be, to rehabilitate the Sisko character. In that event, you could have established that he did indeed return to his family. And this episode could have been philosophically about how you reconcile your responsibilities as an emissary to another species with your own personal wants and desires. And that is the episode they think they're making, because these two writers are retarded. But it is not the episode that has been made. I cannot stress this enough. And of course it's our job on Critics Log not to consider what people intended to do, but what they did. And what they've done here is canonise one of the worst mistakes ever made by a Star Trek writers' room. Perhaps worse than anything that Alex Kurtzman has ever done. I'll say that again. Perhaps worse than anything Alex Kurtzman's writers' rooms have ever done. Now, already you're recoiling from that in horror, disgust. You say, Ed, come on. Deep Space Nine was a great show. What are you talking about? Our Stephen Bear and his retinue, they're 10 times the writers that these people are today. Well, you're right. Of course you're right. And Deep Space Nine was the best written of all the Star Trek series. But the decision at the death to make Sisko an absentee father was catastrophic for that character. Because the whole point of Sisko was that he was a dutiful, faithful father who, a widower in the pilot, was forced to bring up his son alone and was determined to do the best for him, come what may. One of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, The Visitor, was about the tragedy of Jake losing his father early and having to live his whole life without him. Because Sisko was trapped, ironically, in the ether somewhere. But of course, at the end of the episode, Jake Sisko found a way to undo it, and so it didn't happen. Unfortunately, Bear et al. Didn't realise from that classic episode that introducing that scenario for real at the end might be a mistake. I could have told them that, you could have told them that, the dog in the street could have told them that. But they got trapped, hoisted by their own Picard. Come on, this video's free, what do you want? Because they had gone too far down the road of making Sisko a demigod, a sort of pseudo-deity, which again was a terrible, horrific mistake. A decision made in the 7th season. In Image in the Sand, I believe, Sisko discovered that his mother had been possessed by the prophets. This is real, I'm not making this up. And they forced the mother to meet Sisko's father, Joseph I think, fornicate with him and produce Sisko. In other words, Sisko wasn't going to exist if everybody followed their own natural wants and desires and led their own lives. They had to engineer it to make it happen. Which, for reasons I'm about to go into in nauseating detail, don't make a lick of sense. Now, I'm warning you, I know that this seems like a tangent and a diversion. I thought we were here to talk about Starfleet Academy, but this matters, what we're going to talk about, because in this episode, Series Acclamation Mill, a lot of attempts are made here to kind of smooth over the ending of Deep Space Nine, to rehabilitate Sisko as an absentee father, and to, in some respects, kind of gently retcon things so that Bear's decision to have Sisko be a demigod and to bugger off and leave his family doesn't seem so bad. It's not so bad when you think about it philosophically, Starfleet Academy suggests, because, well, they say things like there was no one else to do what he did, you know, it had to be him. Well, it would have have to be him if he was specifically created for the task, wouldn't it? Who else could it be? What, somebody on Bajor who believed in the prophets and actually cared about Bajor because they had an organic connection with it? Yeah, that would have been madness. What, someone like Kira, for example? But, we digress. Jake, at the end of this episode, says, if you think about it, he never really left us. Yes, Jake, he did. He did leave you. He's gone, my friend. You might feel that he's with you in some spiritual way, but unfortunately, you don't have any real connection to the prophets, so he's not. Because the prophets aren't gods, right? They're aliens who live in a wormhole. How do I know that? Because that's Star Trek! And Star Trek is a humanist view of the future, which there are only false gods and false idols, right? And the prophets were no different. They're an advanced sentient species, yes, who, because of their ability to read linear time in a different way, can make prophecies. Not that they're really prophecies. They're saying, look, this is what we've seen already, and this is what we know is going to happen. It's easy to make predictions when you know the ending, but there's lots of little things in this episode like that, right? And ironically, for an episode written by stupid people, Sam, Sirius Acclamation Mill, the retarded teenager who the Photonics have put in Starfleet Academy, to learn more about the human condition, apparently, even though it's a school and the people in it haven't settled in their own identity and they don't really know anything, so it's a stupid place to put somebody if you want to understand humanity. Put them somewhere where, people sort of come into their own and had a little bit of wisdom, wouldn't you? But anyway, we won't get into that. She hits the nail on the head when she goes to a download of the Benjamin Sisko Museum because she's too lazy to go to New Orleans, even though in the 32nd century you can literally teleport yourself, transport there in an instant. She downloads some artifacts, and one of that looks suspiciously like the Star Trek exhibition in Las Vegas, may it rest in peace. And she says, I'll quote her here, because the exhibit's talking about predestination, talking about the fact that Sisko's entire life was planned out for him by the prophets. In other words, unlike every other human in the universe, he allegedly had no choice over any of his actions. Or rather, he had to operate within very strict tramlines. He could choose to have soup on a Wednesday, or Octogeno, or whatever, as long as he worked a certain job, committed certain serious acts, and did certain, things for Bajor, etc., etc. She says, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but she's correct. So we just have to do what we're told no matter what? So we just have to do what we're told? Spot on, Sirius Acclamation Mill. That's the problem with predestination. You have no control over your own life. But this episode errs because it says Sisko saved billions of lives. And it takes great pains to say that only his life was predetermined. But that can't be true, can it? And this is the worst problem with the end of Deep Space Nine and what you leave behind. The revelation that the prophets have been pulling the strings the entire time. Think about it for a moment. If you want to get Sisko to Deep Space Nine, a human born in New Orleans on planet Earth, if you need to get him to Bajor at the exact right moment in order to discover the wormhole and become the emissary of the prophets, that requires a hell of a lot of interstellar manipulation. It is not enough, is it, just to possess one woman and have her have sex with a particular man on Earth. And if you think about it, it doesn't really make any sense that they should go about doing it that way anyway. Why not pick somebody that they know would be born in the first place? Why do you have to engineer the birth at all? There are billions of people in the universe. Surely it would be easier to appear to somebody on a hill on Bajor and say, when the occupation is over, we'd quite like it, old chap, if you would fly a shuttlecraft or similar into this sector of space, and if you do, there's a pleasant surprise awaiting for you there, okay? We won't say any more, but remember I told you. Oh shit, I didn't write it down. Oh wait, come back! No, for no reason at all. They think it's got to be Benjamin Sisko, this human we've created in our heads. So we've got to make sure that it's him. So we'll have to target a woman on Earth in New Orleans, so she meets we've identified the sperm we want to use in this conception, and we've identified the egg. We just got to get them together. Does that make any fucking sense to you? No, me neither. Because you see, they didn't think it through, did they? Did you, Ira? You retconning idiot. But it gets worse, doesn't it? Because to get Sisko to the right place at the right time, think what has to happen. Okay. For one thing, there has to be an occupation of Bajor by the Cardassians. Right? Because if the Cardassians haven't withdrawn from Bajor at that exact time, the Federation have no reason to be there. There has to be a Terok Nor station, which is a symbol of the occupation, a symbol of the Bajoran genocide, no less. The Cardassians were on Bajor for 50 years. 50 years! During which time they killed billions of people in concentration camps. This is the space Nazis and their final solution writ large. People were raped and murdered. Well, Kira goes into it in the series in some graphic detail. Atrocities were committed on a grand scale. But if that doesn't happen, if Cardassia isn't there, if they didn't pick on this planet of spiritual, buffoons, well then, they're not pulling out, are they? When they pull out, and the Federation haven't arrived, and the Federation haven't taken control of Deep Space Nine, and they haven't sent Benjamin Sisko to command Deep Space Nine, and therefore Sisko does not discover the Celestial Temple, and therefore does not fulfill his destiny to become the emissary of the prophets. But it's even worse than that. In addition to all of the Bajorans that had to die to get Sisko into position, Sisko too had to suffer a very personal loss, didn't he? He had to suffer the loss of Jennifer, his wife. And for that to happen, there had to be a battle at Wolf 359. And for that to happen, there had to be a Borg invasion of the Alpha Quadrant. And for that to happen, Picard had to be thrust to Sector J125 or wherever it was by Q to meet the Borg. All of that, apparently, including Q's actions, and Q is a sort of alien like the prophets with godlike abilities. In order for but a more sophisticated version, a mobile version with a personality and an understanding of human idioms and culture, he too must have been manipulated by the prophets, mustn't he? Because if he wasn't under their influence, he wouldn't have appeared to the Enterprise at that time. He wouldn't have baited Picard with the idea that he should join their crew. Picard wouldn't have said something stupid like, "We don't need you." And the encounter with the Borg wouldn't have occurred, in which case the Borg wouldn't know about the Federation as it currently is constituted, even though later it turns out they already did know, which doesn't make any sense. They wouldn't have invaded the Alpha Quadrant. There wouldn't be a Battle of Wolf 359. Jennifer wouldn't have been killed on the Saratoga. Sisko wouldn't have become a widower, and consequently he wouldn't have ended up in a position where he could have been assigned to Deep Space Nine, when indeed it became Deep Space Nine after the Cardassians' withdrawal from Bajor. You following me so far? You see, in order for Sisko to be where he was when he was, hundreds, thousands, millions of lives had to be manipulated in order to position Sisko precisely so he was in the right place at the right time. All of our lives are the result of hundreds of thousands of interactions with other people. Some of them are relevant. When I was 21, my arsehole boss, who's taking advantage of the fact that I was a temp, sacked me in the street for being 10 minutes late to work. I'd stayed up late overnight to watch the 1998 Oscars, which was a terrible mistake because Titanic won most of them. I fell asleep, as you do, at something like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I slightly overslept. I went to work and was a bit late, and because I'd been late by a few minutes a few times before, the woman in question, Helen, who was on her way out of the building, took the opportunity to tell me that I needn't go in, that I was fired. Now, I was a temp, I didn't have any rights, so I had to accept it. And after trying to appeal to her sanity and compassion and conscience, and realising she had none of the above, I went home, a crestfallen man who'd lost his shitty job, and realised, well, I don't really want to do this sort of crap anymore. Why haven't I already gone to university like a normal person? I'm going to do that. And indeed I did do that. And I ended up at university in Scotland, and there, on my first night, I met a girl, and, you know, we became a couple, and things were good for a time. Big consequential results from a single decision by a single arsehole in the street. One spring day in 1998. All of our lives are impacted by little things, and sometimes little people. We don't have control over these things necessarily. But we're asked to believe in the Star Trek universe that Benjamin Sisko's life was just a set of predetermined moves. But for him to get there, millions and millions of other lives had to be changed, and indeed destroyed. Jake tells us Sisko saved billions of lives, billions of lives. Well, in a checks and balances world, in the world I live in the world you live in, of credits and debits, the book entry keeping philosophy, as I like to call it, Sisko probably breaks even. He might have saved billions of lives, but he caused billions of lives to end, some of them horribly. And one could argue that he actually is in debit, because in order to ultimately fulfill his destiny of defeating the Par-Wraiths and all the rest of it, he had to go through the whole process of being a belligerent or a participant, belligerent maybe not, in the Dominion War. The Dominion War had to happen, in which billions and billions of people were killed. Now, Sisko didn't, cause the Dominion War per se, but if you were being a bit reductionist and a bit uncharitable and a bit unkind, you could say, well, hang on, if he hadn't have discovered the wormhole, if the wormhole had remained hidden, there's no path to the Gamma Quadrant, there's no Dominion, there's no war. But the prophets were like, fuck that. Listen, your job is to help us defeat our ancient enemies, the Par-Wraiths, and then come eventually and join us and all the rest of it. So if there has to be a massive interstellar war in the meantime for you to get to that point, in which billions and billions of people are brutally and horribly killed, so be it. That's collateral damage. We don't give a shit about those people anyway. We're only concerned with you, weirdly, one individual. Maybe a quite interesting individual, but hardly an exceptional individual, hardly the most important human or half-human who's ever lived in the history of the world. I mean, why at the end of Deep Space Nine didn't Starfleet declare an emergency and say, we've got to look into the prophets? They are actually the most dangerous aliens in the history of existence. They are almost like gods. I mean, look at what they've done. Look at the catastrophes they've wrought in order to get their preferred human being in position. I mean, you'll have worked at companies and for organisations that have made ridiculous decisions in order to promote somebody that they favoured. Right? And you've had to endure them ever since. But no one, surely, in the history of the universe has, manipulated things to such a degree for the sake of one man as the prophets did with Sisko. But the prophets were never investigated, and we discover here in Starfleet Academy Episode 5 Series Acclamation Mill that the prophets are still regarded as a sort of pseudo-benign mystery. Never been looked at, no one's ever looked into it, nobody's interested in the history, nobody sat down philosophically and asked, wait a minute, Sisko was one of them all the time, and they controlled the entire trajectory of his life. Well, shouldn't we look into everything that sort of stems from that? I mean, there's a lot of questions there. Nope. Now, if this episode had been about Sam, the imbecilic photonic teenager who looks like an idiot and talks like an idiot, if it had been about her unpicking this stuff, this could have been an absolutely fascinating coda to Deep Space Nine. Imagine it in the right hands. Goodness me, they could have gone to town on this thing, and it could have ended with a fleet of starships heading for the wormhole, ready to pummel it with photon torpedoes and close it permanently, because they finally somebody realised that the prophets are an insidious, malevolent, manipulative force which has caused the Federation tremendous hardship. But the closest we get to that is Sam saying, and I'll quote her again, so we just have to do what we're told no matter what? That's it. That's the view of history. That's the view from 800 years hence. Sam, who has access to people, apparently, from the 24th century, like the Doctor, but doesn't think to ask them about Sisko. Her apparent existence and her status as emissary and her place at the Academy is at stake here, because Orson, or whoever she's talking to, says either you do this project for us and blah blah blah, or we will turn you off. And you're thinking, please fail, please turn her off, for God's sake. She's an irritating fuckwit. But of course we know that's not going to happen. It doesn't occur to her to go and talk to the Doctor about it. Hey Doctor, you were in Starfleet in the 24th century. And granted, the Voyager returned after Sisko had ascended. But you could tell me something about it, couldn't you? You could explain to me what went on. I wasn't there. I missed it. Oh. It doesn't occur to her to ask. The Doctor has to volunteer that information. At the end, she meets the current incarnation of Dax, disgustingly played by Tawny Nuisance. And all Dax can offer is, here's Jake's book. And, Benjamin loved idiots. I'm not sure she said that exactly, but words to that effect. Thanks for that, Dax. As somebody who actually knew Sisko across 2 lives, 3 lives, Curzon, Jadzia, Ezri. Boy, it would have been wonderful to sit down with you and intimately discuss Sisko from the perspective of someone who actually knew him intimately. But this is the end of the episode, so I guess we'll just have to fuck all that off. Okay, bye. Bye, thanks for the book. Bye. I hate this show. I hate it on a cellular level. And I thank God that, unlike Sam, I have cells. It's just depressing. Deep Space Nine represented by a children's picture book. That felt like the right level for this show. It was a children's picture book kind of reappraisal of Deep Space Nine. With a character once again thrust into a situation of great importance in universe, because apparently a character cannot be introduced any other way in this show. Last week, the Klingon had to save Kronos. This week, Sam's got to solve Deep Space Nine for us, even though she does nothing of the kind. Isn't there a more organic and interesting way to introduce these characters that doesn't rely on them being involved in huge moments of significance for the fandom or for the universe? Can't they just be doing something interesting on a smaller character-based level? But of course, these writers can't think of anything, so it's like, well, I want to introduce Sam. What can we do? She's an emissary to appear. Oh, she could look into Sisko. That's a hook. But it's one of those better not things, isn't it? Better not. Don't want to tarnish old Deep Space Nine any more than Ira Stephen Bear did in its final hour on TV. So Sisko never came back. Never rejoined his pregnant wife. His son never saw him again. What a depressing coda that is to Deep Space Nine. We know the writers would have brought Sisko back if there'd been an 8th season of DS9. How do we know? Because if you watch the documentary What We Left Behind, there's a mock writers' room featuring all the original writers of the show, in which they beat out the first few episodes of a season 8, and that's exactly what they do. They have Sisko return at the end of episode 1. It's the first thing that occurs to them, that he must come back. Of course he must come back. The idea that he wouldn't come back is ludicrous. Wouldn't. You know, everything we know about Sisko tells us that his primary interest and fixation was his family. It didn't occur to anyone in the Deep Space Nine writers' room that, wait, we're going to make him an absentee father at the end. I'll never understand that as long as I live. One final thing to say about Sisko, because I feel I've ranted enough. The decision to make him a demigod was a terrible, terrible mistake. Ariston Bear said that it was about sort of literalising the tendency the fandom had to make captains into sort of godlike beings on Star Trek. But that is a terrible misreading of the fandom and indeed of Star Trek. The reason we love our captains on Star Trek is because they're human, because they're fallible. They are exceptional people because of their achievements and because of their constitution and their character, not because they're special people. They're not from exceptional bloodlines. They're not Anakin Skywalker, immaculate conception followed by a predetermined existence. Gene Roddenberry would never have endorsed that. Never in a million years. When Deep Space Nine started, it set up the whole emissary plot in such a way that one could imagine later on that it would become a sort of humanist interrogation into organised religion. I can't speak for Rick Berman or Michael Piller, but in as much as they thought about it at all, one imagines that's the sort of thing they had in mind. If Gene Roddenberry had been the showrunner, or the creator have had any creative influence at all, he would have said Sisko at some point has got to debunk the prophets as gods. They can't be real gods. They can't really have that sort of influence. His job is to find a way to sort of educate and mature the Bajoran people, to bring them out of their infancy and to make them see that the aliens that they worship as gods aren't gods at all. They're just highly evolved aliens. And of course, it looks like magic because the Bajorans don't understand these aliens, but of course it's not magic. It's simply a much higher state of being and of evolution and so on and so on. The show's Deep Space Nine was very, very good at critiquing the human side of organised religion in the form of Kai, Wynn, etc. and all the rest of it. It got all of that right. But it was a fatal misstep to actually have Sisko become the prophet's emissary in literal terms. It didn't make any sense for him to be the emissary of the prophets. It would have made more sense if it had been, if you like, a loose interpretation of scripture. He happened to fit the bill. His arrival could be construed to refer to this passage in the Great Bajoran text, subject to very loose interpretation. But in the end, you know, Sisko, while remaining respectful to the Bajoran people and their beliefs, would have found a way to reconcile the scientific and humanist side of things with their faith. That's what Deep Space Nine should have been about. It should have been about introducing a certain scientific skepticism into that scenario and finding a respectful and dignified way out of it. But instead, they jump the shark, they nuke the fridge, they pop into the layer, and they made Sisko a demigod. That's almost as stupid as making a photonic being a retarded teenager and putting her in a school full of other idiots to learn more about the human condition. Deep Space Nine has been not ruined. No, I mean, the ending of the show did that. to a degree. But this episode canonises and consolidates a mistake that had the capacity, had the potential to be undone, and they didn't do it. And for that reason alone, Starfleet Academy is junk! And Kirsten Beyer and Tawny Nuisance should forever hang their heads in shame. They think they've written a Valentine to a great character. In fact, they have forever rubber-stamped his worst error. Until next time, I'm Dr. McAvoy. It's not my real name. Bye!
Close the channel, Mr. Worf.
Gladly, sir.